It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes.
Hello everyone, this is the final video in a trilogy of analyses of the Berserk Golden Age Arc films. Please consider watching my prior two videos before watching this one. All three were made possible by the generous support of a special guest on Patreon. For those watching this in 100 years' time, this video was made during the UK's hottest summer ever. Sounds like nothing to people who live anywhere south of the 50-degree latitude line, but a whole bunch of us on the European continent seemed to think the end of the world was coming. They weren't technically wrong, we're all gonna die someday, but I have enough faith in our collective ability to adapt and survive that I'm no longer worried about it. That might sound naive as hell, but that's because I'm not a scientist, and I don't believe in vacuuming up every bloody panic article that the mainstream news organizations have put out over the past 2 months. So what does this all have to do with the final Berserk film in the Golden Age Arc trilogy? Well, that's because this film contains a sequence that fans will never be able to get out of their heads, similar to how I'm not going to forget the sweltering heat of this year. It's the ultimate nightmare fuel that I don't think any anime or manga that I've read or watched has come anywhere close to replicating. This video will continue to outline what I think about this movie, comparing bits and pieces in the story that were cut in order to keep the final Golden Age Arc film concise and consumable. We left the adventure last time on a cliffhanger. The leader of the Band of the Hawk gets captured whilst sneaking out of Princess Charlotte's bedchamber. We see the dream in tatters, disrupted by a silhouette of Guts, whom we know Griffith blames for his downfall, the result of which is him lying on the floor, disheveled and broken from 12 months of torture. Griffith also has a second vision of demons communicating to him. Even the church are briefly shown discussing the intervention of the Holy See, essentially foreshadowing what's to come in this film and beyond. The remaining Band of the Hawk are preparing for his rescue, with Casca elected as the leader. The film does an excellent job of communicating this burden she has, but before we get thinking about how it might have impacted the other band members, a fight breaks out. During this fight sequence, I had difficulty distinguishing between Hawks and Midland, a touch that works to enhance confusion in the viewer. Guts steps in to assist, whose absence is barely questioned or explored in this film. The manga and anime take Guts on this rather extensive side quest involving a tournament, and later the blacksmith and his daughter. Neither are terrifically important, but the end of the second movie opened up the box of possibilities for Guts going and doing his own thing. Otherwise, why else would you just have him walking off like that? It just feels strange that Guts would show up without at least being pointed towards them, as well as kicking Silet's ass with that sweet, sweet line,
"Don't let him wear you out, he's just a street performer,"
without any context whatsoever. In the mountains, Guts has his sword fixed up and cuts some wood that falls down a waterfall. I suppose the only things worth mentioning here are the interesting commentaries surrounding the purpose of a swordsman and a blacksmith. Guts realizes his sword is proof of his existence, as though it were an extension of himself. This is such a fascinating idea that the sword and his ability to kill are all he will be remembered for. The blacksmith living for the spark of life, fleeting and brief, flashing before his eyes. It's kind of profound in a weird way. I quite like this subplot given its ties to the very first scene in the anime, but also how Guts would eventually acquire the Dragon Slayer at the end of this arc from this blacksmith, which is something the film also chose to neglect. More on that later. Continuing on from Casca's year-long fatigue, events come full circle as Guts once again saves her from falling off a cliff, and at least one of them ends up being naked. This time though, Guts doesn't go tumbling with her, and it's he who bleeds this time. It's great that Casca comes to this realization that she does Guts dirty by sending him into battle. This leads to the pair having sex, which somehow heals Guts' stab wound. I also don't know what is going on with this weird score as well.
"I do know this. I just cannot get enough of you."
It's just corny to an extreme degree.
"I want to make love to you. At least 100 more times. No, make that 1,000.
This set of lines aren't even conjured up for the movie. It's in the anime and the manga as well. Maybe it's a translation issue, I have no idea. Thankfully, this section in the manga has way more dialogue, owing to its exploration of Guts' character. When the pair are going at it, we see him mentally comparing himself to his previous sexual experience when he was mistreated as a child. It's so messed up, but it's so much more interesting than what the film and anime have to provide. This scene is supposed to be the moment where Guts actually comes to terms with what happened to him, which would definitely make sense for this film to explore, considering the whole Gambino thing was definitely shown in the first film. There's something quite alarmingly beautiful about how imperfect their first time is. It's filled with arguments and discomfort. The segment wraps itself up beautifully as well. Her licking his wound and claiming she wants him to wound her to make things even. Okay, yeah, that does sound kind of weird, but I love it. So the rescue sequence in the film is kinda up and down. I definitely appreciated the film developing the history of this prison tower. The animation of the gang slowly descending definitely puts Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring into my mind. Did I mention Berserk has a massive influence on FromSoft games? This is where Princess Charlotte pipes up about the tower being a direct connection to the 1,000-year-old unified empire created by Supreme King Geyserik. All those at the bottom are seen branded for sacrifice too. It makes you wonder how much of this tale is actually true.
I've heard stories about him before, but I also heard that the king eventually became so drunk with power that God sent 5 angels after him to destroy him and his kingdom.
Wasn't it 4 angels?
Because we have a mirroring of this story with Griffith and his own dream, that he too would sacrifice everything to become powerful. The identity of this king is what intrigues me the most though. The seemingly obvious answer would be the Skull Knight.
And according to the rumors, he always wore a skull-shaped helmet whenever he was in battle.
When Zod fights the Skull Knight later, he claims that
You've been our foe for a millennium.
which could tie the two together. They both wield the same sword as well. Could Geyserik have become a member of the God Hand and then defected, riddled with guilt for what he did? Were the other members of the God Hand chosen during an eclipse? Nothing substantial that I've read in the manga thus far, I've just finished volume 29 by the way, ties these two characters absolutely. I guess I will just have to keep reading in the hopes of connecting the dots. I also really liked the moment in the cell with Griffith's brief attempt at strangling Guts, as it makes for effective drama and intrigue. Sadly, the rest of the rescue doesn't really tickle me up the right way. For example, how exactly the band got into the castle is kind of simplified. They're just seen popping their heads out of tombs as though getting through the city walls just ain't no thing. The manga has them entering a marked grave and a tunnel leading into the castle. This is also how they escape as well, bear in mind. There are also some tension building moments in the manga too, such as the princess bribing a guard alongside the band debating over whether to take the princess hostage or not. Instead of making the rescue feel arduous with tactics and flaws, the characters in the film just seem to slip into Midland with a bit of story time and get out through the front door just as easily. Guts absolutely obliterates another door when he kills the little torturer dude. This is one hideously satisfying moment that has me rooting for my boy, right up until guards suddenly materialize on the walkway opposite him. Would Guts seriously not have seen these dudes before they flung a bolt his way? Once again, the choppy frame rate combat spoils this escalation. My problem is purely with the style of animation mixed with artificial camera movements. Then again, it's not like the 97 anime did much better either. In fact, the anime replaced this little dude with the most normal looking person for a torturer who didn't have the tongue obsession or delicious dialogue this movie and the manga have.
Lovely tongue.
This is where you die, and you won't be getting into heaven double-tongued. Not to mention, your breath smells so goddamn rancid, you're going straight to hell. Could you repeat that? I didn't understand you.
From here, the escape is kind of a joke. The gang didn't seem to have a real escape plan once they got Griffith, and just by some miracle bump into a civilian who provides them with horses, a cart, and the keys to the fucking kingdom. There's a shot of the princess and her mate nodding to them as though this was all their idea, with this old man being their best pal. Honestly, the anime commits the exact same sin as the film, replacing this huge escape sequence involving the Bakiraka and the Black Dog Knights with a simple horseback chase that feels way too easy for our characters.
Aim for their horses! Release!
Headed straight forward.
It's an ambush!
The only advantage that the anime has over the film, though, is how Griffith is held up for all the band to see, making the sullen image of the band we see later far more impactful. The film, on the other hand, feels completely unnatural, stitching this celebration scene right next to them all presumably having a hangover the next morning. Bearing in mind this whole rescue sequence takes place on the eve of the eclipse, I think it appropriate to mention how the film missed yet another opportunity to make itself connected with the rest of the established story. Rosine, the demonic insects, the fucking Count from BSA all show up in the manga to take out one of the band's camps. I never truly appreciated how well connected the arcs are in regards to the demons that show up, why they didn't bother with this horrific segment to give the world a feeling of interconnectedness, as proclaimed by the big opening title sequence that each of these films have. I do not know. It's just so weird seeing how goddamn patchy the rescue is in media formats, considering all the options they had at their disposal, which I'm going to detail to you right now. As mentioned, I believe the reason why the rescue sequences are so comparatively bland when lined up next to the manga is because of a certain King of Midland trying to get it on with his own daughter. It is a truly horrifying moment that sees her fighting back against him, resulting in her being in a prostration position, longing for Griffith's return. This provides motivation for her return in the story to help the band rescue Griffith, instead of just showing up because they had a seriously uncomfortable one-night stand. With the year-long gap as well, it makes sense that without the king getting what he truly wants, he would defend his realm from the band with all the scum of the earth he can find. The moment the film showed this shot right here, I knew the Bakiraka wouldn't be making an appearance in this film. I had high hopes for their appearance considering they managed to slip Silat into the ambush at the start. It's a shame because this group of assassins are so fucking cool and don't let the gang off easily either. Princess Charlotte gets a blow dart from one of them, allowing for an intense negotiation with the claw hands dude. Judo uses sparks to see the enemy in the dark. It's just pure awesome shit. However, I can't exactly say the same for Wild and the Black Dog Knights. Don't get me wrong, their backstory is fascinating, and what they do to that family that helps the band is one of the most morbid things I've ever experienced reading anything. I imagine what happens in pre-production with these sort of things is that the producers cut down on the gratuitous elements of the manga so as not to diminish the shock and horror of the eclipse itself. For example, Wild in his demon form picks up Casca, strips and licks her with the giant spiky dick tongue. This for me was too close to what happens to her in the eclipse and doesn't serve any narrative function without digging up older ideas surrounding her character that had already been established. It's a real slog of a battle too that stems across so many chapters. Once they believe Wild has been beaten, he comes back again, where I think they should have just left him for dead. I presume Miura was trying to rehash the idea of demons being invincible that was established with Zod, but even he shows up to stab Wild with his horns and tear him in two, all just to preserve Griffith for the eclipse. This whole scene with Griffith lying on top of Casca is super disturbing but also heartrending that she's burdened with this responsibility, shown visibly by him smothering her. She's made her bed and now she must lie in it. You wind up asking yourself if Griffith just wants to be comforted or if more sinister intentions are at play. It would have been nicer had we seen that little snippet of Griffith's vision where he sees Casca as his wife and mother to his child named Guts. It's quite the interesting vision, though maybe not something he foresaw in his original dream. It gives more context to Griffith being able to enact this particular dream during the eclipse. With the Band of the Hawk ready to fall apart, the soldiers flock to Guts.
We've all decided that we're coming along with you. We're raiders, and we always will be.
Yeah, we've still got a lot of raiding left in us.
Sadly, there is this weird acoustic guitar music that spoils this moment, whilst a lot of what happens here is Guts merely asking,
Should I stay or should I go?
We can be mercenaries, whatever you want.
So long as you're leading us, we're like one big family, aren't we?
And we're all wanted criminals, so we might as well stick together.
As long as you're fighting alongside us, we'll have nothing to fear. Yeah.
Captain,
Come on,
say yes, Captain. Come on.
Come on, please, Captain.
honestly, they just needed to swap out the music for the animes here, and you would have a much better sequence. This moment with Griffith gathering strength to make his final journey into the lake was great. The sound of the wheel colliding with a rock genuinely made me jump. It works for the audience if it works for the story, waking Griffith out of his dream. His attempted suicide was morbid too, laughing at the futility of his existence. So, why an eclipse? Well, I personally love the phrase, sunlight is the best disinfectant. This idea of shining a light on evil has now been blacked out. Now that the sun is blind in a sense, the cruelest evil can take place. This is the part of Berserk I've wanted to analyze for a long time. It has some incredibly disturbing imagery. The floor made of faces making up face-shaped hills of their own. I absolutely love this. It's interesting to see how this first reveal of the Eclipse is handled aesthetically. The widescreen format is definitely the right choice, seeing as we get a larger scope of the demons waiting in the background. Where both mediums are adapting black and white images, to see one red and the other blue, one is clearly going for horror and the other a more glossy, trippy, intergalactic, interdimensional vibe. I personally prefer how the anime handled this reveal because it's far more disturbing and leaves a bigger impression on the mind. The music is better, the bayonet scream doesn't sound like a broken computer.
Make it stop!
And this moment is placed as a cliffhanger at the end of an episode. It's just super. I think that the designs of the God Hand members are astonishing. They stick out in the mind so vividly. For example, on a closer inspection of Void, it looks as though his flesh is being pulled from his face and his eyes are sewn shut as well. It's not just the God Hand that are visually impressive either. I'm in awe of the unique designs of the lesser demons. They are always so impressive. To see panel after panel after panel of countless demons, just amazing stuff. I would imagine animating such detailed images would cost a fortune, so shading, silhouettes, and glowing red eyes are in abundance in this movie. This isn't necessarily a criticism, it's just another example of the manga shining above all else. Did I mention that you should read the manga? And while you're at it, make sure you read chapter 83, which was cut from volume 13. Known as the idea of evil, this entity is essentially what molds causality. All the ideas of the characters being destined to be at the Eclipse, this entity is responsible for it. Even more bizarre is the idea that God didn't create this idea of evil, but man did, represented like a giant human heart. He just gives Griffith wings and is like, do what you want, I don't care. So it's kinda inconsequential, and frankly, I'm not entirely surprised it didn't make it into any of the media or volumetric manga releases. Miura himself believed that the appearance of God would limit the story's range as well, and I concur. As if we didn't have enough to chew on inside the Eclipse without this bizarre chapter. There's something about the idea of Griffith being the chosen one that really intrigues me. Usually it's the protagonist that's granted immense power simply by being chosen, but here it's the antagonist. Interestingly, it only becomes evident that Griffith is the true antagonist at this point in the story, displayed with this crushing flashback, realizing the body count that he's racked up in order to achieve his dream. This road that he's been walking on is paved with the corpses of those he hired and ordered ordered to be killed. Apparently he doesn't need roads anymore.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
For now, Griffith will fly, thanks to those members of the band that will be sacrificed to become the Hawk's wings. The most incredible thing is that the path was paved for him, and Griffith actively wanted it too. It makes the totality of everything built up in the arc mind-blowing, and a great way of creating and developing an antagonist. Everything from here in the film looks absolutely incredible. They truly spared no expense for the most powerful moment in the series. The branding and demons overwhelming the soldiers looks amazing too. You have the first demon guts kills in the manga, luring and destroying Caucus, which I thought was fitting for his glory-hungry characterization. Judo's death is very saddening too, getting his lungs popped like balloons right in front of Casca and realizing he had a thing for her all along. Oh, it's so damn tragic. After stumbling around in the river of blood, Guts finds the corpse of Gaston. I've always loved his final lines and then having his head explode in the manga. It's so meta, and it's a shame it didn't make it into the movie. When we realize that the Count Demon from BSA not only kills Ricketts' group, but also Pippin as well. I cry ever, Tim. Oh yeah, speaking of Ricket.
Rendezvous point.
So yeah, this is literally the first time we see him in the entire movie. 1 hour and 11 minutes in, might I add. This is more a testament to how little development the side characters get in these films than anything else, which kinda diminishes the impact of their deaths. Rickett showing up here without giving us any clues as to what he's been up to since the archery attack 1 year prior is jarring to say the least. It purely serves to show this fucking spicy showdown between Zod and the Skull Knight, which I definitely appreciate. I'm just saying it might have been nice to make the connection between Puck and Rickett for Guts and Casca's rescue with the elf dust, which just isn't a thing in the film. And yet, they showed Puck at the end of film 2. Ugh. Anyway, back inside the Eclipse, Femto is looking freaky as fuck. I've always appreciated the design of this dude. His legs becoming talons, his wings are also his cape, his helmet becoming a beak. It's genius! His first act as the 5th Blessed King is to completely humiliate Guts and take away everything he held dear. His lover, his arm, and his eye. We know Griffith blames Guts for the downfall of his dream. Now Griffith dishonoring this pair in the most gruesome and evil way imaginable leaves no room for doubt who the antagonist of Berserk truly is. The sound in this segment is applause-worthy too. I kinda love this playfully horrific music in the background, mashed in with the sound of Guts hacking away at teeth with his sword that's actively chewing off his arm. Just reading this script makes me... It's just sensory overload.
Such beauty, love, hatred, pleasure, and pain, life, death. Here before our eyes.
I mean, she's not wrong. This stuff makes for great drama, but it kind of reflects badly on the audience because of this contradiction. Like, I love Berserk, but I don't love gory violence and rape. I can't believe I have to say that, but it's probably that idea of vicariously experiencing these things that makes Berserk more of a guilty pleasure than anything else. You wind up asking yourself if the eclipse was actually real or not because the Skull Knight just kind of destroys the moon to rescue Guts and Casca. This stuff is just crazy fun to watch, making me wonder what kind of motivation the Knight has for rescuing them. Even Femto's crazy singularity crushing power is just so surreal, and yet the Skull Knight is just like, nope, and runs off like it's nothing.
How unforeseen.
It's impossible to anticipate everything. We're not gods. How are we to know what will occur?
Casca, traumatized beyond comprehension, is reduced to a childlike state. Guts, crying with one eye and bleeding out the remains of the other, awesome imagery. Meanwhile, Griffith proclaiming that this is the last tear he will ever shed. Now, as Femto, he has abandoned his conscience, all feelings and connections to humanity gone. Guts must reconnect with Casca on a mental and physical level. The fight is not over yet, as the brand has marked them both for death. This is the reason he becomes the monster known as the Black Swordsman, out of fear of losing his life and his lovers. The Golden Age is over, and an age of darkness commences. But hang on a minute. That's not the actual ending of the Golden Age Arc movie, is it? How does he get his mega sword and prosthetic arm? Well, there are like 3 additional chapters in the manga that for some reason didn't make it into the film. Was Casca giving birth to the demon child too much for you guys? The film has the arc in its title, and they couldn't even finish it? This ending is one of my favorite parts of the entire series. Such great quotes like, "When you confront those who lurk in the darkness, you also envelop yourself in it. Dragons are dragons because humans can't kill them. So what's a man who beats dragons?" 10 out of 10. I love this idea that Guts is in the interstice, now adapted for survival in the mortal and demonic realms. The final double spread panel is just so damn good. I want it on a t-shirt. Can someone make that happen, please? But that's it. That's the whole of the Golden Age arc done and dusted. This final film is decent, imperfect, and a bit rocky here and there. The story is there, but for a raving Berserk fan like myself, it's not quite reaching the heights that the manga does. Obviously, I would definitely love to review the 2016-2017 series. Perhaps a Did It Suck is in order for that one. What do you think of this film? Comment below your thoughts, and I'll see you all on the next review. I give The Advent a 7 out of 10. Similar to how I'm not going to forget this sweltering heat of 2020. I also really liked the moment in the cell with Griffith's brief voice break. Once again, the choppy frame rate comrade. The film, on the other hand, feels completely unnatural, stitching this celebration scene right next to them all presumably having a hangover.